Welcome my dudes, this is Coalition Code speaking, and welcome to the final The Simpsons Bart versus the Space Mutant video that I'll explaining what the personal ranking is. I'll just be quickly explaining why every version is at the point where it's at. Nothing really big besides that, in case you watched any of them or all of them if you were crazy enough. It'll just be explaining why the versions are in the spot where they're at. We'll be explaining a little bit more once we continue, but let's start off with the personal ranking of Commodore 64. The reason why the Commodore 64 is all the way at the bottom is due to how difficult it is to control Bart, mainly because he likes to slide everywhere, so it's extremely difficult to either stop and move and you know, pause at the times that you want to pause, and it's also a soft locks / broken. So obviously when it comes to any of these versions, I did not end up playing the original game / it's an original source because I don't have, you know, 10 different consoles to test everything in, so I had to emulate them all in order to play them. So take note that some of these problems might not even exist if I were to play them in the original version that they came in, but besides that, it could also be even more broken. So let's say if I were to get the Commodore 64 with the original Bart vs. the Space Mutants game, I would definitely end up playing the game again to see if any of these problems actually ended up persisting or not. But the reason why the Commodore 1 is so far low is just because the game can pretty much break whenever it wants, and it's extremely difficult to control Bart, and there's just soft locks. Not everywhere, but, you know, pretty much in the locations where you really don't want any soft locks to be in. They're there. It kind of sucks, but regardless, this version I only ended up beating 3 times versus all the other ones where I actually ended up beating more than once. But yeah, the Commodore by far is the worst one out of them all. Moving on forward, we are going to start from the bottom to the top. So the next one is the Atari ST. So basically the Atari ST, the only reason why it's so far below is just because it's a clone of other 2 versions that I had already previously played at this time, and it just plays so much slower. So when it comes to watching the Atari ST and MS-DOS, I constantly said that the Atari ST ran a little bit slower than the Amiga, and the MS-DOS ran slower than the Atari ST, and that's actually not the case. It's more like the Atari ST runs slower, like 4 times slower than the Amiga, which is technically the version where I want to say came first, but I obviously have no actual proof. And then the MS-DOS, and the Atari ST is just so much slower. It's super easy to control Bart, but because of how slow it is, like, it just had to be really low in the ranking chart. But besides that, there's really nothing wrong with this version. Obviously, it's just you play extremely slow, and it also has the goals glitch, which is amazing. So that's always nice to see, right? So the Amiga is the first version where I ended up finding out that you could skip having to pick up any of the goals by pure accident. So all you have to do is jump, press left, press nothing on the D-pad, and then as Bart is facing the opposite of where you want to go through, you'll actually end up going right through the invisible wall, which is pretty neat. But yeah, I mean, the game looks extremely nice considering where it's coming from. But moving on forward to the Sega Game Gear. So the main reason why the Sega Game Gear is third to last is just because of how bad the camera is. Like, if the camera actually ended up being either more zoomed out, or if they ended up placing Bart further to the left of the screen and have more of the screen visible to his right, the game would have been that much better, but because it's also pretty much a Master System clone, that's the only reason why this version is so low. Like, it's so easy to take damage in unwanted spots, mainly because of how fast the enemies show up after the mall, basically, because once you get to the mall, enemies come towards you in every other level besides the nuclear plant and Springfield, and it's just horrible. So you basically have to stop and go in order to not end up taking damage, unless if you know where the location of the enemies are, and even then you might end up dying anyways. The other reason why it's not even lower than where its location is because of this is the only version that actually ends up having the power rod glitch. You can actually end up picking up every single power rod without ever having to go to the basement or going to Marge, which is pretty amazing. But besides that, that's pretty much it. If they would have fixed the camera, which obviously knowing the location because of the Game Gear, they had to do it that way, I guess. I don't really know, but moving on to the MS-DOS. So the MS-DOS is pretty much a Amiga clone slash Atari ST clone. There's really no other way to put it. It pretty much looks exactly the same as the Atari ST and the Amiga, which is kind of interesting. I believe the MS-DOS is the only version that you can actually end up playing in the web browser, so I believe if you search for like MS-DOS Bart versus the Space Mutants, you'll be able to find it somewhere. I honestly don't know because I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure when I was doing all of this work and before I even started going the in-depth, I accidentally ended up finding that the MS-DOS was available on the internet just to play, just to mess around with. And on top of that, the MS-DOS is the only other version that the Wikipedia does not mention whatsoever, which I find extremely interesting, mainly because while I was searching for other versions of the game, because of the MS-DOS looking exactly like the Amiga and the Atari ST, I kept thinking if the MS-DOS was either a fan-made port or something like that. Like, it just pretty much, there's no difference in it other than if you slightly look at some of the UI is slightly different, and obviously due to how fast Bart ends up moving, you can see how slightly different it is that way. But other than that, when it comes to graphics and playstyle, everything is dead the same. So it's like, well, the only reason it's so far below the ranking system is just because I had already previously played the Amiga. The Amiga was the very first one I played, and I'll be explaining as to why that one is so high up in the ranking. But besides that, you know, this version is actually pretty cool. I want to say you can find it and just play around with it without having to get anything special, but could be wrong. Moving on forward to the Sega Master System. So the reason why this one is pretty much halfway through the ranking is, if I think about it just in general terms, the Master System obviously looks far better than the NES when it comes to color-wise and just in general playstyle. Is just everything about it is so much better. But the only reason that the Master System is halfway through everything is just because I had played the Sega Genesis one first, and the Master System is actually slower than the Genesis. It not only that, but it also lacks on any of the glitches whatsoever. It has 0 glitches, so you actually have to end up playing the game the intended way, which kind of sucks. But obviously, when it comes to casual playthrough, it doesn't really matter because you would never even know anything about glitches or anything like that to begin with. So it has great physics, but to me, the colors just, sometimes they just pop out just a little bit too much. especially in the mall. There's just way too much going on. Can't say that I'm much of a fan. Basically, the MS-DOS and above, all the versions don't really matter all that much to me. Playing either of the MS-DOS and above is the same as playing the NES all the way down to the MS-DOS again, because they all pretty much are the same. Anything below the MS-DOS is just pretty much something that I would suggest you stay away from, just because of how dumb it is, in a sense. Well, whether it comes to trying to control Bart or just the speed of Bart in general. But yeah, I believe the Sega Master System is, you know, a good neutral for every single other version that this game has, including the NES. But you know, someone that actually ended up playing every single version, I'm obviously gonna like one much better than the other. So moving on forward to the Sega Genesis. Sega Genesis, out of the entire Sega family, it actually ends up playing the fastest. Not only that, but it also has the no goals glitch, which I find pretty hilarious, because the versions that have the no goals glitch is actually only the Amiga, MS-DOS, and Atari ST, and obviously all three of those are clones of each other besides the Genesis. So it's kind of interesting at the fact that it has the no goals glitch to begin with. Besides that, it plays extremely fast, so trying to control Bart is actually going to take you some time, but I want to say it plays slightly worse than the original NES version when it comes to trying to control Bart, but I could be wrong. That's the way I take it, at least, where I had a lot of trouble trying to control Bart. It took me about a week, if not longer, to get used to his physics, but after that, he's not that bad to take control. So I actually enjoy this version quite a lot. If you ever get the chance to try it out, I would obviously suggest to play the NES and then the Genesis, mainly because the Genesis actually is faster than the original NES, even though it's not by much faster, even though you can actually end up skipping every single goal again. So you would think that the Genesis would be way faster, since you don't have to pick anything up, but somehow or another the NES can pretty much be right behind its tail, which I find kind of hilarious. From now on, all of the versions I pretty much enjoy quite a lot. Hope you enjoy them as much as I did. The next one is the Amiga. So this is the other version that I played when I thought that there were only two versions of Bart versus the Space Mutants. So when I was playing the NES, short story is I thought that I knew that there were other versions, and I thought that the other versions was only Amiga and Sega Genesis, right up until my brother ended up telling me that there were other versions as well. And then looking into the Wikipedia, because at that time I wasn't even thinking about it, and turning out that there were 9 other different versions of the exact same game, which is exactly what brought me to doing all of this to begin with. I was just mind blown. I thought it was incredible. So yeah, the Amiga has plays quite fast, and it has the no goals glitch. This is the version where I found that the no goals glitch even existed, and it's pretty nice. Obviously the graphics, they're nowhere near as poppy as the Genesis one is. Like the colors are just in your face, and the Amiga actually tries to emulate the original, which is exactly what I love about it. So it's extremely awesome. It has the no goals glitch, which is amazing, and Bart moves rather quickly. So I enjoy that very much. So moving on to the Amstrad CPC version. For this one, it has horrible. It has great physics, but it has horrible graphics, and that's pretty much the reason why I love this version so much. I love this version so much just because it has like slide by slide gameplay, so it's not, you know, fluid scrolling. You have to play it like it has the one section of the level, and then it flips over to the next section of the next level, and then it just keeps going like sections by sections, and it's nowhere near as fluid. That's pretty much the reason why I love this version. Not only that, but because the NES one was released about 2 to 3 years earlier than the Amstrad CPC, and just seeing how further behind this version looks compared to its original, it's kind of hilarious. That's what I love about it. It's just the fact that even though it's released way later, for whatever reason, it looks so much worse. And I don't know, I just, when I first got my hands on this, I was like, damn man, this thing is just so different. It's pretty unbelievable. But yeah, that's pretty much the reason why I enjoy this version. It's just because it looks so much different compared to every other version thus far. The next version is obviously the other version that looks beyond its original source, which is the ZX Spectrum. This is the other reason why I love this version so much, and it's because it just looks different. I don't know, to me, just because it looks so much different than its original source, it just obviously makes the game pop out on its own. I just love how different it looks. There's really nothing more to say. I find both the ZX Spectrum and the Amstrad version the next two versions that you should end up playing at some point, assuming you enjoy this game as much as I did, as well as the Amiga and Sega Genesis. Like, those four is pretty much the reason why I decided to go in depth with this game, is because if you're comparing it with the NES, which is exactly what I did, like, the two versions just look so different, or, you know, each version looks so much different that it's pretty crazy. It's crazy how they managed to release the game 10 different times and make every single version different, even though they're basically just being ported from one section to another when it comes to comparing to the Amiga, MS-DOS, and Atari ST again, or even the Sega family. Like, the graphics aren't all that different, it's just it plays slightly different because of the controller and whatnot, right? So, I don't know. Other than this game having great physics, there's really nothing else to it. It also has the slide by slide gameplay, so it's not fluid scrolling again, and I don't know, I just find that quite charming for some odd reason. And obviously, last but not least, my most favorite Bart versus the Space Mutant is obviously the NES, and the reason why the NES version is that much more fun to me compared to every single other version is because it's the original source of where this entire series came from. So I was playing this, I want to say when I was 5 years old or so, and then playing it way over my, you know, when I turned 10, so playing it for over 5 years, never being able to beat the game. Not only that, but playing the game in black and white TV, and not being able to read English, because at that time I had no idea how to speak English, and trying to color everything from purple to red I think it is. Yeah, getting rid of or changing the color purple to something else with the spray can, like, it's pretty incredible. And the amount of Easter eggs slash secrets that the game has when it comes to the secret hat room or the sound test in Springfield, like, it's crazy. Like, again, playing the game for over 5 years, never beating the game, coming back to the game about 15 years later, still not being able to beat the game unless if I had save states, and then finally beating the game with save states, and then again beating the game one more time with no save states. It just felt incredible to actually finally clear a game that you had basically been waiting for, you know, close to 20 years plus, just trying to beat one game, like one NES game. What's hilarious is, you know, finally beating the game after, let's say, 5 to 8 hours, and then beating it again in less than 30 minutes, and then getting world record with under 16 minutes. So basically it took me over 20 years to go from not being able to beat the game whatsoever to beating the game in under 16 minutes. Like, I don't know if you guys will ever even understand what that means, but for me it was just a great feeling for sure. This one will always be obviously my most favorite one out of them all, just because it just has the most memories for obvious reasons. I had no idea that this game would have been released 9 other different times, and then never even knowing about any other version besides the NES, and then all those other versions also playing in its own unique way. It's nice. I know, again, there will never be a time where a game is released on so many different consoles and PCs or platforms in general. That is what made me go through searching in depth what got changed, what got left in, and whatnot, because the NES is by far the only one that actually has developer initials, which I showed off in its original version when I was starting the in-depth. So obviously, for anyone, if you either missed them or didn't watch them all, you can go even further in depth of every single version just by clicking on the playlist and looking there. So I did a in-depth of every single one. Some of them were comparing to each other and not the original NES, just because of how similar it looked. But it's definitely a sad time that I'm finally finished with this, because I've been working on it since December. But I did do a speed run of every single one. I've linked those versions as to like the fastest time I beat every single version, and seeing how different those times are with others is also a really nice thing to see. I would suggest to at least check out the speedruns, and I also ended up doing a all 10 version speedrun. So basically I did a single speedrun of every single version, and I beat every single version at once, taking a little bit over 4 hours and 30 minutes, I believe. And that was quite stressful, mainly because I was adding in the extra pressure of beating every single version without game overing. So when it comes to Bart versus the Space Mutants, as soon as you lose all of your lives, you go back to the beginning, so there's no way of continuing from the last spot where you were located. So doing a speedrun of every single one without being able to die was quite stressful, especially since the Commodore 64 was by far the most difficult version. out there. Like when I first started doing the speedruns, I was definitely thinking of leaving the Commodore 64 for last, but the more I thought about it, I would be like, okay, I'm gonna finish 9 different versions and then reach Commodore 64 and then immediately die, and that would be just stupid. So yeah, leaving the Commodore 64 for first and then do all the other 9 versions was definitely a great idea. Again, you would have to see the only time that I actually ended up doing a speedrun of all 10. Before that, I was doing runs. I was using it as practice. So basically, I was beating as many as I could or trying to beat as many as I could. And if I ended up dying, I would just continue and not actually count that as a clear. So I did like less than 5 attempts or so, and then finally got the 1 clear from the Commodore, and then just moved on with my life because it felt amazing when I finished them all, and it felt really great just beating them all to begin with, both casually and in speedrun attempts. And then on top of all of that, I ended up going in depth of what was changed and what wasn't. So even though I did try my best to both show and speak out what was different and what it is I liked and disliked about every single version, I know it was not the best way to have done everything, but I really hope that you guys enjoyed regardless. Again, this is the final video that I'll be talking about when it comes to Bart versus the Space Mutants. I really hope you guys attempt at least one of these 10 versions, if not at least just the original NES. Just know that trying to control Bart is extremely difficult in the NES, just because he's always in like ice physics style type of physics, which kind of sucks. It does take quite a long time to get used to the physics that Bart has, but regardless, I hope you guys enjoyed. As soon as I'm done, I will show off the very first Springfield side-by-side of every single version playing at once, and playing all at once, just so you can see all of the mayhem that the game has, both when it comes to graphical physics and speed. And so you can see that comparing every single one with every single one all at once would have been an extremely bad idea. So with that, I'll leave those videos play all on their own, and then the videos will end as they beat the final boss. Hope you enjoyed. Please check out any of the other versions or the speedruns. And with that, I'm gonna head out. Everyone take care. Hope to see you in the next one, and peace out.